Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
We are two pastors talking about life from a biblical worldview. And a topic we want to talk about today is how we have become so divided and splintered in the evangelical community on race, politics, and gender. There's been quite a division. So we want to talk about why are we so divided? And we're mainly going to look at an article that Kevin DeYoung wrote on March 9th of 2021 called Why Reformed Evangelicalism Has Splintered: Four Approaches to Race, Politics, and Gender.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing. And it just always reminds me, no matter who you are and what year you live in, people are tribalistic by nature. Isn't that interesting?
It is. It is. And it feels like we're in like a super tribalistic age, but maybe it's just normal. I don't know. Maybe it's just always this way.
Yeah, I think it's just always has been,
Yeah.
and it evolves over time. And I think the internet has really accentuated it.
Yep.
I
That's
think
for
like
sure.
pre-internet days, you just like you might disagree with like a neighbor down the street, but in general, like there's only so many arguments you can get into without the internet.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Kevin DeYoung, he begins this article by saying, his memory is being in the room, so to speak, in the early 2000s for the start of what has been dubbed the Young, Restless, and Reform movement, or the New Calvinist movement, or the Reformed Resurgence. Um, but he said from the 2000s through the 2014 or so, there was just this amazing unity and growth that existed kind of in this group. And there were some disagreements about like infant baptism or not, and the sacraments and spiritual gifts and polity and approaches to worship. But overall, this kind of large group was held together, he said, by a few theological convictions: historic Christian orthodoxy, inerrancy, penal substitution, Calvinist soteriology, the Reformation solas, complementarianism, and the centrality of expositional preaching. Um, and that was just kind of young, restless, and reform movement. And for about a decade, it seems like this was just growing, growing, growing. There was a growing emphasis on being black and reformed, and so you had Christian hip hop artists like Lecrae, Shai Linne, um, bringing what was called like big God theology into kind of the new wineskins of Christian rap.
Yeah.
Um, and it seemed like people were really coming together in this movement.
Yeah. We should probably do a podcast just on young, restless, reformed. I
Sure.
would guess if you're like 45 and younger at the church we pastor, it's likely you're a product of this.
Yes.
This really heavily influenced a lot of college ministries through
Yeah.
those years. I would say in some ways it may have kicked off with John Piper's famous sermon about the seashells in
I
like the
th-
late 90s,
I
kind of kicked
think
this off.
I think so. Yeah.
And Acts 29, Gospel Coalition, your Pipers, that kind of thing. That's all. If you're like, my favorite pastors are of the ilk of Piper and Chandler and Tim Keller and MacArthur and all this stuff,
Yep.
you are probably a product of the
The
Young
young,
Restless
restless, and
Reformed.
reform movement.
Yeah.
Uh, And then DeYoung said you had Ferguson in 2014, you had Trump elected in 2016, you had the Gospel Coalition host the MLK 50 conference in 2018, which was enormously controversial. You had coronavirus 2020, 2021. You had George Floyd in 2020. You had the end of the Trump term, pretty rocky, 2020, 2021. And he said all of that, all of the coming together seems to have been all but ripped and torn apart.
Yeah.
Um, especially on the issue of race. So systemic racism, police shootings, critical race theory, and kind of lumped into that anything that touches it, but Trump related to that. Um, and so the group that was together seems very divided. I mean, the irony even in the conference together for the gospel essentially ended up splintering as a result of this stuff, you know?
Oh, I didn't know
Uh,
that.
yeah, I mean, this was all a part of, I mean, they basically said we feel like we've served our purpose, but you had people like Thabiti Anyawibble and John MacArthur both preaching at that conference, and then all this stuff came out, and they were on the total opposite ends of that, and you know, here we are. Um, so what DeYoung has done in this article is he's trying to figure out how do we understand our differences. Um, so kind of leading to can we have more constructive dialogue? In part is understanding the team that you're on and how you think, and then therefore be able to speak to people on a different, quote team. Um, help understand yourself better, understand one another better, have better engagement and conversation. Um, because some of this stuff we're just talking past each other a lot in a lot
Yep.
of circles, and we need to learn to talk to each other better. And I think that's what Kevin is trying to do here. And I ran across this on Twitter last week. I'm sorry, X. Uh, and I just found it enormously helpful. Um, so here's the four categories.
And before we say, I just want to make sure we're covered in saying these four categories we're about to say aren't perfect. Not everyone's going to fit neatly into every box. Really, what we're trying to do with this podcast is we really want to help move conversations forward.
Yeah,
Instead of just yelling at each other online, we talked about that a lot, right? Instead of being keyboard crusaders, instead of just writing people off, like this happens a lot, right? You hold a view, you hear a different view, you just write them off.
yeah,
Instead, we're trying to give categories to understand yourself and others so we can move conversations forward.
yeah,
And so keep that in mind as you're listening to this, because some of the things you may hear, you're going to be like, oh, I I really don't like when people believe that. And you're like, okay, well, now you understand which you're not in that
right.
category. You're in a different category. And it's helpful to understand where you are to have these conversations in the first place.
Yeah, and I would say to add to that, like we're going to give the four categories he gives, and then he gives a lot of examples on different topics as well. And like we were talking before we started recording on some of these examples, we were like, I really disagree with that one. I think that's a really problematic view to hold.
Yeah.
And so I would say one, these are just categories. It's not gospel, so like hold it loosely. But two, like we're not saying all of these categories are like biblically neutral. In
Yeah.
we're not necessarily saying every approach of these and every issue is okay.
Yeah.
We're trying to describe where different people are at, how they come to different issues, so that we can get into a conversation, not just a yelling match. And this is kind of a natural follow up to our podcast on the Alistair Begg controversy last week, because a large part of what is happening in that circumstance is a total talking past one another, pointing fingers, but not really a understanding and engagement and dialogue. Um, so this is a good way forward. So
Yeah.
DeYoung gives four categories. Okay, contrite, compassionate, careful, and courageous. Okay, so category number one is contrite. This is how he describes what you might say if you're in this category. Look at the church's complicity in past and present evils. We have been blind to injustice, prejudice, racism, sexism, and abuse. What the world needs is to see a church owning its sins and working in brokenness and make up for them and overcome them. So that's contrite. Second category he lists is compassionate. Quote, look at the many people hurting and grieving in our midst and in the world. Now is the time to listen and learn. Now is the time to weep with those who weep. What the world needs is a church that demonstrates the love of Christ. All right, category 3, he calls careful. Look at the moral confusion and intellectual carelessness that marks our time. Let's pay attention to our language and our definitions. What the world needs is a church that will draw upon the best of its theological tradition and lead the way in understanding the challenges of our day. Number 4, courageous. Look at the church's compromise with, if not outright capitulation to, the spirit of the age. Now is the time for a trumpet blast, not for backing down. What the world needs is a church that will admonish the wayward, warn against danger, and stand as a bulwark for truth, no matter how unpopular. So those are kind of the 4 categories. Daniel, where would you put yourself?
I think I most probably identify with 3, the careful one. Um, and depending on the topic, I can lean towards 2 or 4,
Yeah.
depending on what it is. Um, he gives this definition of contrite that I think is a great definition. But when I look at the actual, so, we'll link this website, but, he has kind of this chart and with these different categories. And the way I would say, like, contrite, with the definition he has for contrite, I can get on board with principle, but a lot of the application that I see from it, I probably disagree with. That's kind of
That's
where I land.
that's well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I'm I'm like a 3 wing 2. Careful, winged, compassionate. Uh, so I would also kind of put my probably um most both of my feet are closest in the careful camp. But if I'm gonna lean, I probably lean toward 2 on the compassionate side more than 4 the courageous side.
Yeah.
Um, and I do find myself like a lot of times I feel like I agree with people in the number 4 camp, but I just am agitated by how they go about it.
You know,
Um,
I
I,
was,
I like find that that's my natural reaction, you know?
yeah, I was just about to say, I think sometimes in my heart, I'm a 4, like a courageous, like want to not compromise the truth.
Yeah.
But my natural personality and how I talk to people is most compassionate and wanting to weep with those who weep.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of both. Um, and just to let you guys know, as our listeners too, I'll probably use the numbers here some, uh, instead of like listing out the full definition. So,
1 is
yeah,
contrite, 2 is compassionate, 3 is careful, 4 is courageous.
yeah,
Um, so to let's just get into some hot water. And he gives several examples of how you could apply this to race. We'll look at a couple. So let's start with systemic racism. Okay, and these are the categories that DeYoung gives. So systemic racism, a contrite person would say systemic racism is rampant. Disparities imply discrimination. A compassionate person would say not the only explanation, but it should be seen and called out. A careful person would say open to the category of systemic racism, but racial disparities exist for many reasons. A courageous person would say a Marxist category we must reject. So what are your thoughts on how he breaks that down in the 4 camps?
yeah, man.
For
I'm
listeners?
glad you asked for my opinion first on this.
I'm
You
not going
know,
to share any of my opinions. So
yeah, I think I just want to say I think these are really helpful categories to have
you can
because
probably when you, if we all flash back to the PTSD of 2020, um, you could probably start to picture faces of your friends in each of these categories. Like this is,
yes,
this is like you're like, oh yeah, that's where that guy is, and that's where she is. It is kind of helpful.
it's really helpful. And I'll tell you why. I've been part of in some organizations I've been a part of in the past, I mean, I'm talking tens, if not hundreds of hours of conversation about race and systemic racism.
Right.
And I know people both who would be all profession Christians. Uh, and I would say, from the fruit of their lives, I would say I'm going to see all of them in heaven,
Sure.
right? That some land in this contrite camp. I mean, some in all categories, but it even when we were having these conversations, the contrite people could not understand the courageous people's viewpoint, and the courageous people didn't understand the contrite, and they'd even try.
I feel like having twos and threes understand each other is not impossible. I mean, you got to do a little work, but not too much.
Right.
But having ones and fours understand each other, that feels like it takes a miracle.
Because I feel like if you even if you had these categories and understand I'm a four and he's a one, okay, we're on so far starting points.
Yeah.
Before having the actual conversation on systemic racism, you kind of got to be like, how do we actually get to the same starting point to have this conversation
Right.
about systemic racism, right?
You'd have to define your terms super
Yeah,
clearly. And so here's another example he gives. So here's what he says about critical race theory. Remember that thing? Um, Contrite would say CRT is full of good insights. Compassionate would say chew on the meat, spit out the bones. Careful would say the core concepts of CRT are deeply at odds with Christian conviction, but let's not throw around labels willy nilly. And the courageous camp would say CRT is the church's path toward liberalism. Now, again, here, it's almost like you also have to define terms, which is funny. How I'm reacting, even to the categories, shows that I'm a number three, a careful,
right,
because I'm saying, well, let's actually define what CRT is first before we throw grenades at each other. Because I do think in this whole discussion, we throw around labels with this one. Um, but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I know people. Um, I would have a hard time if you really defined CRT the way the like Marxist school actually defines CRT, the Frankfurt School. I would have a hard time saying how you could say that's full of good insights from a biblical worldview.
right.
But
I
again,
would
it's how
say
you define it. But
as loose. I would say on this one, chew on the meat, spit out the bones is kind of as loose as I would get on it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, because I think there are certain views, and this is for any view uh, that you're thinking about. Your measuring stick should always be biblical truth, not current cultural quote unquote truth, right?
sure, sure,
And I think some of this is like, uh, I feel like the contrite people can lean towards taking too much from the culture. Uh, and I think the courageous people can sometimes lean towards applying it in a non-helpful way,
yeah.
the Bible in a non-helpful way.
You know,
And once again, generalities,
yeah,
but the middle two, compassionate, careful, are more live in the gray a little bit more,
sure,
and the ones before live in the black and white, and that's why I've pointed out one and four more.
yep. This makes me think we did a podcast series. Forgot what it was. It was using Center Church and Tim Keller, but we looked at all the models of cultural engagement, the two
Yep.
kingdoms approach and the transformationist approach. This really applies to this. Uh, that applies to this as well. These categories, which kind of approach to culture you take.
Yep.
Um, because it's almost like contrite on the number one is a high view of common grace and a low view of like uh, special revelation almost, right?
Yeah.
Is in general, you're like, you're more comfortable borrowing from the culture. And as you go down this list, it feels like you become less comfortable borrowing from the culture. Um, almost to the point on the courageous category. This is a little facetious, but it's almost like what's common grace? Like everyone's going to hell. It, there's nothing good or redeemable in the culture at all. It's
Right.
just, that's another way as I'm looking at it, it does kind of,
And I would say, as you're having conversations with people that have different views, some questions that are helpful to ask is, what is like your main goal of your view, and
mm,
how did you arrive there? And what I mean by that is,
yeah,
the contrite people that I know seem to care about brokenness they've seen in their own lives or in their family and friends' lives.
yeah,
And so that's what leads them to their view.
yep,
And then the courageous people tend to see the detriment of even a little drifting away from the scriptures.
yeah,
And their biggest fear is uh like heresy that comes from loosening the scriptures, right?
yep,
I would say both of those desires are good desires.
yeah,
And even starting by acknowledging that is helpful,
yeah,
right? If you're a courageous person talking to contrite, once again, it's a spectrum, right? And so the people in the middle, you can hold kind of anywhere in between what I just said.
sure,
But for me to say, I really am afraid of the church's path towards liberalism doesn't mean I can't also see in you that I can see you have experienced brokenness and I still want to love you,
yeah,
right? Let me hear you out. How can we still, like, the church shouldn't push towards liberalism, but we should also care for people. Those things aren't independent, and we've just
yeah,
made them independent things of each other.
that's well said. Yes, so much of it is like what your background was, and for as much as we don't like to admit how much experiences have shaped us, they have. And so if you're on the kind of courageous camp, I'd be curious, like, your greatest fear is the drift toward liberalism. Like, how has that played out in your life? Like, because maybe, maybe it was you saw this pastor start giving on these things, and then one thing led to another, and he slid down, and now he's denied the faith, and the church you grew up in blew up, and you had this like traumatic experience, and you're like, it all started because this one guy started giving on the culture,
Absolutely.
right? Versus a contrite person, you're talking about it's like when in 2020 when Senator Tim Scott went on the floor of the Senate and talked about how many times he had been pulled over for doing nothing, seemingly just because he was a black man. How many times he had been like ID checked going into the Capitol when there's only 100 senators, like they know what they look um like he's sharing all these experiences, and I just remember thinking when he was sharing that, like, man, I would just probably view this whole thing differently if I had lived his life. um so part of it is like in these things we should make the attempt to get in the other person's shoes
Yeah.
and see, like you said, what their motivations are for holding this view and how they arrived there, um, are
You,
helpful.
and the reason we say this is because I, you know, in my experience as someone who's been in ministry now for over a decade, I've just met with hundreds, if not thousands, of people, right?
Yeah,
And something that
maybe
I've learned,
millions.
yeah, like at least 15 billion people. And one thing that I've learned is change never, like, you almost never get change outside in.
Yeah.
Like, and what I mean by that is, like, if you're just yelling like you're a heretic or you hate people or whatever it
Hmm.
is, that's like an outside in thing.
Yeah.
You're trying to just, you look at the behavior or the like end result of their view and you just attack it, attack.
Yeah.
But where I've really seen change is to say, let's have understanding together, understand we're brothers or sisters in Christ. We're actually trying to get to the same thing, the glory of God.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
we just have different ways in how we believe how that's accomplished.
Well said.
And there are some people on all through this spectrum that have really good thoughts that are good and biblical, and some that need to be corrected, some more than others,
Yep.
right?
Well
So for
said.
this example, in the critical race theory, I would say that brother or sister, I would say probably needs some correction if they're like really holding on to CRT as a
Sure.
really good thing. Like
Sure.
in the Frankfurt school Marxist way.
Yep.
And but the you don't get there by saying, you Marxist,
Right.
like
Right.
get out of here, Marxist. You deserve to be destroyed and all this stuff. It's like, no,
Yeah.
like
Right.
it's got to be an inside out change. And that's what we're trying to really drive at.
Yeah.
Do you understand the inside of the heart of people and what their desires are? And why is it that they are coming up with these applications?
Mm,
And if those applications need to be corrected, uh, yes, we should always, say what is right and stuff, but change oftentimes is inside out, is what I'm getting at.
well, and I'd also say too, I think you can take your thought process there and apply it on a broader spectrum as well of like moving from principle to application. So, for example, we talked last week with the Alistair Begg thing of, these people are canceling him, but they agree with him in principle. He agrees with them in principle on, you know, uh,
Right.
that marriage is between one man and one woman and sexual activity is only right in the context of a monogamous heterosexual marriage. So, but the application of what do you do when invited to a gay wedding, that's what he was talking about, right? So, distinguishing between principle and application, and I think you take like the race issue. If you're talking to another Christian, you're probably going to agree on the doctrine of the Imago Dei, how we're made in the image of God. You're probably going to agree on how we will all stand before God and give an account, not for our mom's life or our dad's life or our grandparents' life or the life of our collective race, but ourselves, our life. Like you're probably going to agree on that. So you're going to probably agree on the principle, but then you may have like way divergent views on how to apply that to the issues of the day. And so helping kind of come back to what can we agree on and then maybe challenging one another if you're talking about critical race theory, for example, then challenge people's application based upon I actually don't think that is a fair application of the doctrine of the Imago Dei. I think you've gotten off from your foundation and fight from there. I just think that's like a fairer way to fight than saying you don't believe the common Imago Dei for all people. No, like help people work out their applications from their principles.
Yeah.
Um,
And even if we did the Alistair Begg thing through these categories, you could have the contrite people would say, that's great advice.
yeah,
The compassionate people would say, chew on the meat and spit out the bones. The careful would people say, hey, I don't know if I agree with that,
yep,
but let me look at your heart and see if the principles agree. And the
sure.
courageous would people say, cancel Begg,
Burn them down. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I probably land probably compassionate here with
sure.
him.
On that topic, yeah,
But a lot of people, we even got some comments that from courageous people, and I'm like, man, you've even missed what I was trying to say, just because like I'm saying I see Alistair Begg's heart in this, maybe disagree with the application that he gave. But now you're lumping me in with him because everything, if you're a
yep,
four, three twos and ones are all
yep,
banished. And,
yep,
and is kind of how it comes off at least.
yeah,
And going the other way, it can be the same too,
yep,
right?
100%.
So
All right. Well, since we haven't been controversial enough, let's apply this to politics and gender, just because that would be fun. So he has another table on this. We'll do a few of these because I think it's helpful. Let's take, the least controversial person in politics. Donald Trump. Let's just go Trump. Um, so he lists on the topic of Trump, contrite people would say, no, the church's allegiance to Trump is the clearest sign of its spiritual bankruptcy. The compassionate crowd would say, a matter of Christian liberty, but there are good reasons to criticize Trump. The careful people would say, a matter of Christian liberty, but there are good reasons someone might have voted for Trump. The courageous crowd goes, yes, he's not perfect, but he stood up to the anti God agenda of the left. So you see, 1 and 4 are literally an inverse of each other.
Yep.
And then 2 and 3 are a nuanced of one another,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's 2024. So I would be shocked if this conversation does not happen in your family or in your communities, your neighborhoods, even at the church you go to,
So, all right. So I'm going to put you on the spot so I don't have to answer this question. Let's talk about a local church together, right? I get how 2s and 3s can get along here and kind of talk about things. But if you've got a 1 and a 4 in a church together, how do you live out your brotherhood and sisterhood with that person?
Yeah. I would say if Trump can put a wedge between two brothers in Christ, then you're not brothers in Christ, you're brothers in Trump.
Ooh.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if that's what is, you know what I mean? Because like, is Trump greater than Christ? Not even a smidge of a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're going to let him destroy your love for each other in Christ, we have definitely put our weight in the wrong thing.
You have functionally made him greater than Christ, even though you would say you haven't.
Yes.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I understand this is a very emotionally charged topic, but as Christians, we need to take a step back and say, is our allegiance first to Christ? Because if it is, then what is the greatest command? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's how we need to approach these conversations, understanding how much we disagree.
That's good. Well said. Yeah. Gosh, I'm glad
Did
I
I
asked
pass?
you.
Oh my gosh.
I'm glad I asked you that, and you didn't ask me that. All right.
It has to be, right? If
Yeah.
we're really Christians and saying Christ reconciles all things,
yeah,
the way you reconcile the contrite and courageous here is in Christ.
Yeah.
And it won't be, and what I mean by reconciling is it does not mean you necessarily land on the same application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just means you trust Christ more.
It was well
than
said.
Those things.
Yeah. That's good.
And in all things, I mean, that's what we should be doing.
Yep. In all these categories, for sure. Let's take Christian nationalism. Another easy one. Sarcasm. He says contrite, one of the biggest problems in our day, a dangerous ideology at home in most conservative white churches. Compassionate. Too many Christians are letting their politics shape their religion. Careful. Christian symbols and rhetoric supporting insurrection is bad, but the term itself needs more definition. Courageous. A new label meant to smear Christians who want to see our country adhere to biblical principles. I feel like these are pretty good definitions on this one.
Yeah. And, we did a podcast on this. And to me, I'm like, you ask 4 people to define Christian nationalism, you're going to get 4 different definitions of Christian nationalism, like we see here. And it's like, that's why you can't have a conversation, because you're not even working off the same terms.
Yep.
Like the same definitions for terms.
You're such a 3.
Yeah. I'm such a 3.
No, I feel the same way though. Yeah, because I'm a 3. All right, sexual abuse. I mean, this has been a huge topic, especially in SBC circles lately. So he says contrite would say, it's about time the church owned this scandal, believes victims, and calls out perpetrators and their friends. The compassionate crowd would say, sympathize with the victims, vow to do better. The careful side would say, each case and each accusation should be looked at on its own merits. And the courageous side would say, a real tragedy, but so is demonizing good people. Man, yeah, this is I mean, this is a tragic thing that you even have a. It's tragic you have categories for any of this, but this especially is awful.
And I would say this is one of those where I'm like, I'm all for.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
all four of them have great
Yep.
points
I
here,
mean, yeah, this one is
which
like,
might make me a two or three to
yeah,
say that.
yeah,
Uh,
This one very much feels like depends on the setting, depends on the circumstance.
and I would say for here, like because so many sexual abuse stories have come out as true,
Right.
um, I would almost push back against, I normally like, in full honesty, my natural bent is to like push back against liberalism.
Sure.
But here in this case, I probably would push against like, uh, there's just too many stories of like protecting the institution
100%.
that if you land in courageous of protecting the institution,
Yep.
that's how you cover up abuse.
I'd agree
And
with that.
so, I would probably push back against that way a little bit personally.
Yeah, I would push back against a 4 much more than a 1 on this particular issue. With where we're at today and all the things we've learned. Um, yeah. And then the last one, gender roles. So the contrite crowd might say the problem is toxic masculinity and unbiblical stereotypes. The compassionate crowd may say traditional views are good, but many dangers come from our own mistakes. The careful crowd may say we need a strong, joyful celebration of biblical manhood and womanhood. And the courageous crowd may say the problem is feminism and emasculated men. So you go ahead and put Mark Driscoll down on that courageous category right there. If you're wondering, who might fit that category, that would be him. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, on the contrite side, you're gonna a New York Times is gonna be a closer uh one to that, or you know, um, yeah. So, what do you think of the gender roles piece?
I think this is a helpful one. Like I personally don't like the term toxic masculinity,
Yeah,
but I'm also a male, so if you're a female listening to this that likes the term, maybe you're like,
you're,
exactly,
yeah, that is toxic masculinity.
Yeah. And what I would say is like, let's have a conversation then,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Like, I'm not gonna, if you're throwing that term around at me, I, I might not like it, but let's talk about
yeah,
it. And that's the point of this whole thing, right?
yeah,
It's just so easy to say, oh, you disagree with me? Let's just shut it down
yeah.
and shut down the conversation. Assume the worst about your intentions and what you actually believe and how you got there. And once again, this is a great example of like, how did you arrive at your position?
Sure.
Like what happened in your past to shape what you think?
Well, I mean,
What end goal are you trying to reach
yeah.
with your position? Um,
I mean, combine the sexual abuse and gender roles piece. If you were raised in a strict complementarian church that held to strict traditional biblical gender roles, and at the same time were abused by your pastor or your father, um, are you? There's no. I mean, are you telling me you're not going to land in the contrite camp? The problem is toxic masculinity and unbiblical stereotypes. I bet you are going to land there. Um,
right.
in part because of the horrible abuse and experience you went through. And so, yeah, I think you're right. Part of it is taking enough time to listen to learn one another's stories. Um, and before I am accused of standpoint epistemology, uh let me give some give some background. So standpoint epistemology is basically like essentially we all have a different way of looking at the world, and basically they're all kind of equally right, depending on our perspective. Um, that's not true. The world is what it is, and truth is truth, and it doesn't matter your perspective. Uh, so I'm not saying your perspective is right, but I'm saying it's your perspective. Um,
Right.
and I think that's important, right? Is like you need to know that you have a lens through which you view the world.
Yeah.
And as much as you would like to believe, if you're a good Bible believing evangelical, that the only lens is the Bible, it's not. Your ethnicity is a lens, the culture that you grew up in is a lens, the culture that you live in now is a lens, your socioeconomic status is a lens. Like these are all things that come into your life that you're not even aware that you're interpreting things through that grid, through that lens. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's your perspective. So until you recognize that you have a perspective and other people have a perspective, you're not going to get very far in these conversations.
Yeah.
So, so there you go. So those are, I think, four helpful categories. A few different helpful examples. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I love to hear if you apply this to your own life and have a conversation, or maybe you just recognize something in yourself through this. We'd love to hear from you and just see how this affected the way you even think about yourself or the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Agreed. And as we close today on our most uncontroversial podcast, we have our listener of the month. And this listener of the month is long, long, long overdue.
It is.
Who do we have?
We have Daniel Tyler Linderman.
DTL. Daniel Tyler Linderman was actually the one who gave me the idea of a podcast before you had the idea of a podcast.
Oh yeah,
And
that sounds like Tyler.
Tyler
Yeah,
and I had one episode together. We had one episode of a Christ Fellowship Church podcast, and we talked about like the vision and history of CFC. Um, so he's been a faithful listener from the very beginning. So
yeah.
Tyler, we're sorry it's taken this long to give you listener of the month. You deserved it much, much earlier.
Well, yeah, we're thankful for you, Tyler.
Yeah, good man. Good man, good elder, good friend. Well, thanks for joining us for Monday Musings. We will talk to you again next week.